It's my job to introduce really the thematic and the topic which we're here to discuss, which is nationalism and culture reflections from Tagore. If you think of the 165th, I think the point to be made is today we're marking the 165th birth anniversary of Tagore. And of course, we remember, I think all of us with awe, the multifaceted contributions of Tagore to art, music, poetry, literature, philosophy, and education. Some dimensions are perhaps better known than other dimensions. And perhaps marking a birth anniversary may be a way to draw attention to dimensions we've not thought about so much. The other point of marking a birth anniversary can be that we bring to life 165 years later a Tagore who speaks with urgency to our contemporary reality. And if you go back to, I think, Robinson and Datta's biography of Tagore, they make the point that he was not an analytical thinker. He was always an intuitive one, preferred a poetic analogy to prosaic argument. Sometimes his thinking was inchoate, but without exception, he was courageous. And by which they mean that he didn't mind taking on the society in which he lived. He didn't mind challenging the society in which he lived. And one example they give is that in 1916, speaking in Japan and across the United States, he eloquently warned each nation about the dangers of militaristic nationalism, unbridled commercialism, and the love of technology for its own sake. And again, if you go back to one of the great interlocutors of Tagore, who was, of course, Mahatma Gandhi, who carried on a public debate with Tagore on the pages of the papers, as it were. And in one such debate, Gandhi sees Tagore as a visionary and writes that true to his poetical instinct, the poet lives for the morrow and would have us do otherwise. He characterizes Tagore famously as the great sentinel, meaning somebody who's warning us of the future yet to come. As Gandhi puts it, I regard the poet as a sentinel warning us against the approach of enemies called bigotry, lethargy, intolerance, ignorance, inertia, and other members of that brood. And today, our topic, nationalism and culture reflections from Tagore, speaks to a thematic with which Tagore engaged with throughout his life through poetry, music, novels, arts, and essays. And in particular, there are the three essays on nationalism in which Tagore comes across as a really fierce critic of nationalism. But at the same time, we know that he's the author of two national anthems of both India and Bangladesh. So how do we reconcile these two Tagores? The Tagore is a critic of nationalism, and the Tagore is really the symbol of the nation through the national anthem, as it were. If we go back to Tagore as a critic of nationalism, he's a critic of power and a form of unthinking sentiment which results in the mentality of the mob with no space for individuality. Again, as he puts it in one of the three essays, the idea of the nation is one of the most powerful anesthetics that man has invented. Under the influence of its fumes, the whole people can carry out its systematic program of the most virulent self seeking without being in the least aware of its moral perversion. In fact, dangerously resentful if it is pointed out. And in particular, again, he warned about the rise of nationalism in Japan, which is the land of the East, based on the nationalism of the West. And again, the way he put it, I think I should just read this in full. He says, I have seen in Japan the voluntary submission of the whole people to the trimming of their minds and clipping of their freedoms by the government, which through various educational agencies regulates their thoughts, manufactures their feelings, becomes suspiciously watchful when they show signs of inclining towards the spiritual, leading them through a narrow path not towards what is true, but what is necessary for the complete welding of them into one uniform mass according to its own recipe. The people accept this all pervading mental slavery with cheerfulness and pride because of the nervous desire to turn themselves into a machine of power called the nation and emulate other machines in the collective worldliness. However, for Tagore, this critique of nationalism goes hand in hand really with an appreciation of the importance of feelings, emotion, connection with nature, and a love of the land. And there's a kind of a deep connection of a people to a land. Again, quoting him on Japan, what he says, even as he criticizes very powerfully the Japanese forms of nationalism, he says, I watched the sunset in your southern sea and saw its peace and majesty among your pine clad hills, with the great Fujiyama growing faint against the golden horizon like a god overcome with its own radiance. The music of eternity welled up through the evening silence, and I felt that the sky and the earth and the lyrics of the dawn and the dayfall are with the poets and idealists, and not with the market men robustly contemptuous of all sentiment. That after the forgetfulness of his own divinity, man will remember again that heaven is always in touch with his world, which can never be abandoned for good to the hounding wolves of the modern age, scenting human blood and howling to the skies. So, really, I think the national anthem we should refract through Tagore's strong critique of nationalism. And here, I'll end with one last quotation. This is actually from T.M. Krishna in a book called We the People, where he refers to the national anthem Janagana Mana, and he interprets the words Jana, Gana, and Mana. And this is the way T.M. Krishna puts it. He says in three words, or equal syllabic measure, Tagore brings together the people of India together. Everything that follows is an elucidation. Jana is every individual of this land. Gana are collections of people and communities. And Mana is the heart and mind of each individual as well as the collective identities. The preamble to our constitution begins with the words, we the people, an idea encapsulated in Jana Gana Mana. Tagore recognizes individual free will and spirit, but does not forget that we live as groups. Who we are is defined by the exchange between the inner and the outer, the self and its myriad reflections. In placing mana after the psychological markers of the individual and the collective, Tagore expresses his hope for fraternity. The coming together of the hearts of individuals and all the choose and unchosen identification is India. In just three words, our entire social and political consciousness is covered. So you get a sense, in a sense, of for Tagore, that the idea of nationalism is really about a cultivation of connection with the land and its people, and it's a broader, more encompassing humanism. And I know that all our speakers and our performer will really speak to that possibility. So without further ado, I'll call upon both our speakers and start with Mrs. Achalya Maulik, who's actually written a wonderful book called Rabindra Tagore, A Man for All Times, which I think there's just 3 copies available. I just managed to get 1 copy, but I think ma'am will speak a little bit from the book itself.
It's a great privilege and honor to be here. Many anniversaries of Rabindranath have gone by, and it's the first time I think that we have had such a nice gathering. And it means that the message of Rabindranath is probably more relevant today than ever before in this terribly blood-stained world. Now, I would differ from this word nationalism. I would rather say that nationalism has been weaponized for political purposes. It began in the early 13th century by a Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, who was at odds with the papacy. And these two, the empire and the papacy, were fighting for predominance in Europe. So this emperor decided that the first place to rouse nationalism was in Italy, so that once Italy became a nation instead of fragmented countries, princedoms and kingdoms, the wings of the papacy could be clipped. And it was a great dream to have unified Italy in 1295. And one of the great followers of this emperor was Dante, the greatest poet of Italy. But that movement failed and Italy fell back into fragmentation. After that, it was Napoleon who took up the idea of nationalism once more for a political purpose, because he wanted to see the breakup of the old empires, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, even if possible, the British Empire. So, and the Ottoman Empire. He thought if he could challenge the imperial progress of these empires, France would have a chance to rise and take their place. And so 19th century nationalism became one of the slogans for people. And gradually there was an awakening that they wanted nation states, they wanted to throw off the yoke of foreign domination. And it went on right to 20th century. And it got its real impetus after the First World War, and India led the way. And then, of course, Second World War, it depleted the manpower of all the great empires, and then the national movements began all over the world. I think it's, rather than the nationalism, I think it is Gurudev's patriotism which strikes one. And people who have questioned his patriotism, there were some very mean people who, in Bengal, one regrets to say, who said that he had become an international figure and he was more interested in getting accolades from the West than in India, and that he was influenced by Western literature, Western thought. On the other hand, the Nobel Committee, people like Waldestam and Werner, they thought that Gurudev had affinity with the mysticism, medieval mysticism of Europe. He said his poems reminded him of the mystical poets, the Renaissance poets. So we have diverse reactions to his poetry. Rabindranath's nationalism or patriotism, which I would prefer to call, was first exemplified in the national anthem, which he composed in 1908 for the first Congress meeting in Calcutta. He was asked to do it by the organizer there. By then, Bankim Chandra's Anandamath had been published, and Vande Mataram was very much, but it was more of a song and music which was confined to Bengal. It was not, and probably for the revolutionary movement and a more aggressive nationalism. And this anthem, which I have discussed with many foreigners, they have said there is no national anthem which embraces a country the way this song does. Physically, spiritually, religiously, it's as if Gurudev had embraced the whole of India, her mountains, rivers, people, languages, religions in one song. And I think there can be no greater feeling of patriotism and nationalism than this great national anthem. One American friend said, compared to Jana Gana Mana, their national anthem, bombs bursting in the air, it seems so trivial. And there's nothing really deep-rooted in that. It was a victory over some invader. I think this was the keystone of Gurudev's patriotism, which he was, and he was very modest about it. He said, if there has to be a national anthem, let it be Vande Mataram. But anyway, he composed it. And it's a great pity that many people, especially young people, don't know the second and third verses, which are really mystical. The first thing is sung, and the people who have made a great study of this are the Russians and the Germans, who have translated the entire anthem in their own languages. And if I may digress to be a little mean, we used to get a little, I think many people found it very offensive when an intellectual like Kushwant Singh said this anthem was written to pay homage to George V. George V came to India for the Delhi Darbar in 1911, and Gurudev wrote composed the national anthem in 208. So when he said it, though he was an elderly person and a colleague of my father, I had to write to him that it's very undignified to denigrate your national anthem and say that it was written as a homage to King George V. In any case, I don't think George V would have understood a word of the national anthem. And instead of Shanko Baje, I think he would prefer bagpipes. He wouldn't know what Shanko and others are. So this was the foundation of his national anthem. And the other great episode in which Gurudev showed his enormous courage, I would say, incandescent courage was in 1919. And when my parents were newlywed, Second World War had broken out, they had gone to Shantiniketan to pay homage to Gurudev. And he related this, how he was struggling, and he was trying to persuade my father, who had just come back from Europe with various degrees, that come and teach here. And my father was very attracted to teaching there because he was being turned away from all government jobs because he was a close associate of Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, our moderator was quite surprised when I said father accompanied Netaji to the arms, all the arms manufacturer when they were just starting the Azad Hind Force, the Grottanellis and the Krupps, so he was in the blacklist of the British. So Gurudev said, if you're an unemployed young man, come and teach in Vishwabharati. And it was prospering well, but not so much. And in 1919, this is 6 years after he got the Nobel Prize, the first Asian to do so. And then the British conferred on him the knighthood, not to be, sort of lagging behind. And they wanted people like Rabindra Tagore and others to be on their side in the forthcoming struggle in the First World War. They didn't want any dissidence and rebellion in India. Gurudev took it in good grace and he was not anti-British in the way the political parties were. He studied at University College and traveled around the world. At that juncture, for him to renounce the knighthood, in a letter which we were making a museum in the Red Fort, which then Prime Minister, in a burst of patriotism, asked us to call the Martyrs Museum. And he said, devote a whole hall to the Indian national movement. And there we made a huge scroll, like a screen, of Gurudev's famous letter to the Viceroy and the Governor, renouncing the knighthood. And my father used to say, the language is that of Pericles of Greece, is nothing less. How he wrote in the most courteous language that I'm expressing the numb, the shock, the horror of my compatriots at what has happened in Jallianwala Bagh, that a country which calls itself civilized and talks of liberty, freedom, and all that should allow one of their generals to fire on 3,000 unarmed people who had just gathered to protest against the Rowlatt Act. And of course, it's been shown vividly in David Attenborough's film on Gandhi, spine-chilling, the brutality. And I therefore renounce the knighthood. I would like to be treated as the humblest of my compatriots. And this made sensation all over the world. Nobody had ever renounced the knighthood. And there were many knights there in India then who did not follow his example, C.V. Raman, Ramaswamy Iyer. And another point of picking I had with Kushwant Singh was, did your father, Subha Singh, was a Sardar, did he renounce the knighthood after his kinsmen were killed in Jallianwala Bagh? So, of course, everybody thought they were on the winning side. I think these two episodes exemplify Gurudev's patriotism. He couldn't do. And after that, the British did harass him, not very directly or roughly, but they send a circular saying that government officers' children should not attend Shantiniketan school and Vishwabharati. The funds started drying up. And the paradox is, it was this renunciation which made him famous all over the world in courage, and became a great hero in Asian countries. When he went to China, and of course, he was the great poet, and the Chiang Kai-shek called him the thunderous voice of Asia. He went to Iran, then under very much the thumb of the British and the Americans with the Anglo-American Company. And the British told the Shah that is last Shah's father, that don't give him any state benefits and protocols. The Shah of Iran defied him, took his private plane and met him in Shiraz and said, I want to meet Rabindra Tagore in the city of Persian poets. This is where Firdausi lived. So he attained enormous respect for this act of patriotism. And this was not nationalism in the narrow sense, which is aggression, which later developed into militarism in Japan and Germany. And today we see that the nationalism taken to its vicious conclusion in Israel. If this is nationalism, I think the world can do without it. And what I wanted to say, of course, because you were talking of nationalism, that he was also a world figure, and he had transcended national boundaries, which is, I think, what we all would like to do. Not being cosmopolitan, not being globetrotters, but trying to understand the civilization of other countries, which he did. He went to Russia. Again, the British told him he's not to go. He defied them. 1931, he was really in the bad books of the British by then. He went to Russia and he wrote a beautiful travelogue and called Russia Chithi, Letters from Russia, which my father gave me to read when I was 7 on our way to America. I could never understand this dichotomy. And it's a marvelous book, how an aristocrat, a devout Hindu, metaphysical poet, landowner, Nobel Prize winner, former knight of the British Empire, how he could completely identify himself with the ideas of the Russian Revolution. And it became, when it's translated in Soviet Russia, they did it immediately. The Commissar for Education, Lunacharsky, said, this has to be made, all Russians must read it. They showed that the great poet was beyond country. And, our patriotism is grounded in India and whichever country it is in. But I think as human beings, we owe it to ourselves to get over the physical boundaries of the terrestrial boundaries and go into something else. And Gurudev entered in the spirit of many countries, whether it was Persia, whether it was China, Japan. He became a great favorite in Cambodia, in Thailand, and one of his poems, one of the most mellifluous poems, Shagorika, which means sea maiden, there he talks of how India had gone to East Asia and how they had brought the message of Buddhism, Hinduism, and it ends with a very sad note that today I have come not with my crown, not with a sword, I've come with my veena, and it's addressing to all people of Asia, can you recognize me now? And this, I think, was his contribution to the ambience of the 20th century. A subjugated India could go to the whole world and give the message of India, of compassion and goodness and spirituality. So Gurudev was a traveler in many worlds and grounded in India, to whom he gave his whole life and devotion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. And thanks also, Arvind. I won't call myself a Tagore scholar by any means. All I can say is that I'm a lifelong admirer of Rabindranath Tagore. And in my own humble assessment, I really would class him as probably the greatest human being about whom I've come to know. More than that, it's hard to say. As people have pointed out, he was a many-sided genius, much more than a poet. And we could go on and on about his many, many achievements, many contributions. But today we've gathered to discuss his views on nationalism and culture, And what I wanted to say, first of all, others have also noted it, that it is very remarkable. When you read Tagore today, some of his warnings, some of his statements look like they could have been written yesterday. And the reason is that he was writing at a time when the world of his time was in great crisis. And Tagore was not the only one. There are many others at the same time. For example, Eric Fromm wrote much later. Many of the took a humanist line because they could see that what they thought of as civilization was going to get destroyed. There was massive violence. And Tagore, when he wrote about nationalism, he was in the interwar period, where one war had ended, but another one was brewing, and he could sense it. And there were many other problems of the time, but it was a time of great crisis. And today also, without going into great detail, we also feel that we are living in a time of great crisis. And people really don't know where to go, what to think, what direction to take. There are no really any ideas that seem to be sticking out to help us. And this was exactly the situation in which Tagore wrote. What Tagore calls nationalism in his essays is actually his reactions to the British nation state. And much of his discussion was about the British nation state and in what it was doing, and not only the British, but what he calls the Western nation. But in Tagore's writings, he conflates the nation with capitalism. Many of his criticisms of the Western nation are actually criticisms also of capitalism. So what I'd like to do today really is to highlight a few issues that I think we could discuss. I mean, I would like to open the door for discussion as what can we learn from it? Why is it relevant? And what is very natural at a time when you feel that you're living in a time of crisis, it's very natural to turn to the nation. What else can we do? Who will save us? How can we collectively face the question? So therefore, that makes the question of how to deal with nationalism very, very relevant even today. Now, of course, it's very paradoxical, as has been pointed out, that a great patriot like Tagore had some remarkable cautionary words to say about what nationalism means. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of these points that we can discuss, where I think we can. Tagore, first of all, the number one point I wanted to make was that he contrasted the nation, quote unquote, vis-a-vis society. And he had a vision of the two. What he called the nation, and he used this term in many, many occasions, as a mechanical device. He thought of the organization of people to achieve a collective purpose. He thought it was mechanical, and he wanted to highlight that mechanical element. And he opposed that with what he called society. And society for him, so nation for him was a form of social organization that is developed to overcome challenges. And it had a mechanical purpose. And when it's not, of course, we must face these problems. But Tagore hinted from the very beginning that man faces a challenge. When you go about trying to solve your problems, you must not lose sight of your moral purpose. So that is another fundamental theme running all through Tagore's writings, that it's a question of morality. And that is very central. And today also, when we try to understand what's going on in the world, we are thirsting for moral direction more than a solution. What is society according to Tagore? According to society has no ulterior purpose. For him, it is a natural regulation of human relationships so that man can develop the ideals of life in cooperation with one another. So this is the contrast. And of course, you can see where will be the locus of society. It will be in ordinary people's life. It will be in the ground level. So throughout both Tagore and Gandhi, their idea of nation was always defined by connectedness with the poorest of the poor, with the most ordinary people. In fact, rural life was very, very central to them. What Tagore immediately pointed out, even in these early writings in 1919 and 1917 or 16, when he was giving these lectures, he said certain things that look like very relevant even today. For example, he said that this growth of the modern state has taken as its focus wealth accumulation. And this is accompanied by fear and competition. And that this drive for material accumulation rapidly crosses all boundaries. And then he says that selfishness attains supremacy. So you can see that he is interpreting the growth of the modern state, is linking it up with capitalism, and he's saying that we've lost the idea of social cooperation and we've become drowned in selfishness. So that is a critical issue which is relevant for us today as well. I mean, some of the things look like you could say it even today. So he says the following, that yes, materialism is not wrong, but after you satisfied man's needs a little bit, that's fine. Growth becomes very rapid. And the moral man, I'm quoting now, the moral man is left behind because it has to deal with the whole reality. In other words, an imbalance is created in man. And then he uses a very, very telling analogy. It's a little long, but I'll read it. A paragraph. He describes the system of the time. A materialistic system, he says, quote, is like an exaggerated giraffe whose head has suddenly shot up miles away from the rest of him, making normal communication difficult to establish. The greedy head, with its huge dental organization, has been munching all the topmost foliage of the world. But the nourishment is too late in reaching his digestive organs, and his heart is suffering from want of blood. So that is Tagore, a very dramatic way of Tagore expressing what excessive materialism can do and what this imbalance that has been created by what he's calling the nation state. You can also call it capitalism of that, industrial capitalism. The other point of contrast that I want to highlight for our discussion is Tagore's view of nationalism versus humanism. Because Tagore's solution is humanism, and he had a particular approach to humanism. And where does humanism come from? And according to Tagore, humanism, what is happening with this is dehumanization is going on, this whole, what I described just now. So how do you save the human being? And so he being a poet, and he says that what is important is relationship with natural surroundings. He was a great advocate of nature, and he detested aggression against nature. Communal life, the second part, and beauty, love, and social obligations. These are the emotions that sustain humanism for him. And he then goes on to say that if you take these away from a man, he becomes easy to manipulate for production of wealth on a gigantic scale. And he says, and I quote him, turn a tree into a log and it will burn for you, but it will never bear living flowers and fruit. So so he's saying this is the role of humanism. So he's basically taking us towards spiritualism. Basically, Tagore ultimately at the core was a spiritual figure. So what should be done? Tagore was not totally against materialism. He said we need a balance. And he said materialism should not be the final thing, but I quote again, to free the spiritual being from the tyranny of matter. That's our challenge. Can we use our scientific skills? Can we use our technological knowledge to free the human spirit from the tyranny of man? So this is the task for us, and even today remains a task. So he says, how do you do it? You must accept limits of material accumulation. We must regulate our appetite. Avoid what he calls an endless feast of grossness. Make space for the creation of ideals. And then he says, our goal should be true human freedom, which he defined as moral and spiritual freedom. Incidentally, this link between freedom and economic development is something that has been picked up in current times by people like Amartya Sen. His book, Development as Freedom, is a way of picking up on this idea. What is all this material, what is development growth all about? Unless people have capabilities, unless people are truly free. So he defines, Amartya Sen defines freedom in a general way, and that is consonant with, I would say, what Tagore's definition would be. But then he went on to say, what is the conception of a good society? What did he think was a good society like? And I, of course, compiled his comments. But I think these are some of the bullet points. Individual freedom, the ability to be flexible to the possibility of change, don't close your options. He was against excessive regimentation and specifically criticized Japan, as was pointing out. He was in favor of what he called, which I don't fully understand, I'm quoting, the completeness of moral personality. I don't quite know exactly what he means, but we can sort of. Then human integrity and keeping alive, I'm quoting, the higher instincts of sympathy and mutual help. So therefore, the spirit of cooperation and serving the common interest of all. So this is Tagore's definition, according to what I've read, of what he considered a good society. And he warned against another aspect of nationalism, which again is very relevant for us today and elsewhere else, which is pride. He said that Europe, is lost in pride. Even if it is deserving, he said, all pride ultimately breeds blindness in the end and always seeks to humiliate others. Yes, your culture may be great, your background may be great, your history may be great, but if you become proud, you'll end up hating others, denigrating others, insulting others. And this was his basic criticism of the Western civilization, European particularly. Now, and then he was warning us that if you don't change, and we're warning the West actually, you don't change your ways, you will end up, you're on a path that will end in a conflagration of suicide. Doesn't it seem relevant today? We are sitting on the brink of a potential nuclear explosion right now. And so 100 years ago, this was what he was visualizing. And to prevent that, how can you prevent that? Tagore said, man will have to exert all his power of love and clarity of vision to make another moral adjustment and accept the spiritual unity of all human beings. So ultimately, at the end, to come together, unless you accept the spiritual unity of all human beings, there really is no other way, according to him. And then he had some comments on India of his time, and some of them are still relevant. I'll just mention a few points. He defined India's problem in his essay, Nationalism in India, as the main problem in India from the beginning has been what he called, quote unquote, the race problem. And basically what he wanted to say is that India is a place where multiple races have come and joined. And this is expressed most vividly in his poem Bharat Tirtha, where he talks about Ei Bharater Mahamanober Shagaro Tire. Everybody has come from all over the thing and joined. Now, and of course, Tagore says that India has accepted, has not turned back anybody. However, Tagore says that one of the problems we made, and what India did according to him, his interpretation of history was all these different people with many differences came. Time's up. 2 minutes more. Okay. So let me quickly this thing. So let me quickly say that he basically said that we have made our barriers too much, too long, too strong. About the caste system, he said that it fulfilled a certain purpose of keeping people separate, but we built such walls that they became too rigid, too inflexible, and that is why he said that it lacks the mutability which is the law of life. And now what has happened is life has departed from our social system, and now we have created a magnificent cage of countless compartments that we have manufactured. And he went on to say very openly that he was strongly argued in favor of intermarriage. And he said in Europe, many races have coexisted. Why? Because they can intermarry, mingle and intermarry. And he goes on to say, in Western civilization, they do not have, quote unquote, that physical revulsion, one for the other, that we have between different castes. So he pointed the need for correct emotions to build humanism. It's not just a grand idea. It must have an emotional reality. And I just will quote here, but before I end here, I wanted to point out that this whole question of trying to have spiritual unity, Tagore has some surprising parallels with Vivekananda. And before I end, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that Vivekananda had to say about this. About this whole question of universal brotherhood and ability to live together. Vivekananda had said that, look, talking about universal brotherhood, he said, look, it is impossible to find uniformity in thinking about spiritual matters. However, this is good because differentiation of ideas awakens thought. So both of them appeal for flexibility, debate, discussion, being open to possibility. Variation is a sign of life. It must be there. Vivekananda. Every major religion has a soul behind it. It takes up one part of the great universal truth and magnifies it. It is an addition, not an exclusion. Narrow-mindedness is when the part is always claiming to be the whole. And he strongly opposed forcibly trying to impose one particular religion. He said that this will lead to violence and worse, contempt, social hatred, and social ostracism. He actually used the term fanatics for people who pursue this line. And so what did Vivekananda say? And it's very similar to what Tagore said. But he used the word acceptance. He said that it is acceptance, and acceptance is more than tolerance. It goes beyond tolerance. We're not talking about tolerance. We must accept. And what does it mean? Accept all religions and worship God in every one of them. So again, like Tagore, he's saying, keep your heart open for all that may come in the future. So this openness and flexibility and open-heartedness, acceptance in our difficult times is what we need.
Thank you to both our presenters for shedding light on different dimensions of Tagore. Mr. Maulik, thank you so much for, I think the three terms we now have are humanism, patriotism, and nationalism. Mr. Maulik in particular stressed on the fact that Tagore might have been a very strong patriot, even if you not call him a nationalist. And the way she described that was very beautiful. She said, look at the national anthem. It's a point of the reflection on a certain kind of a love of the land. You see the verses. She mentioned the first verse as well as the second verse. The first verse is about the people, is about the land. Second verse is about the people who inhabit the land. So the idea of Tagore's idea of nationalism and patriotism is a certain kind of a love of the land, a certain sense of love of the local, which is beyond or which is more important than the idea of the nation, which can sometimes result in the no space for the individuality, no space for freedom, no space for a range of other things. And again, the reference point that I thought was Janaganamana is the idea that the nation, in Tagore's imagination, must have a place for freedom, must have space for individual expression. And those are the dimensions, which again, going back to Mr. Sen, is what we find difficult in today's context, where the idea of the nation, in a sense, is so overwhelming. There's no space for the individual to breathe. And again, Professor Sen made the point that the move is from nationalism for Tagore to internationalism, where the idea is not so much a love of one's country, which means you can't love anybody else, but a kind of a love of one's place, which is local and which is specific, which opens out a love of the larger. And there's a certain kind of a humanism and internationalism, which is there in Tagore's spirit, which is the idea of, you mentioned individual freedom, the lack of regimentation, and the sense of a greater integration of the self. So in a sense, it got back to the preamble idea of liberty, equality, fraternity, and a certain kind of a broad internationalism, which Tagore embodied and exemplified. But I think I really would like some more interaction with the two speakers. So we'll leave it open to the floor now.
Thank you. It was really nice listening you people. I have one question. So we say that fascism comes behind in the garb of culture. So when you are reflecting nationalism and culture, so it said that maybe the fascism can come because of culture, because you are building on culture, and you can take the example of popular culture, right? So popular culture, you build your nationalism, and you can see in current context of our time. So my question is, the Gurudev, has he ever been critique of so-called popular culture that can build the idea of nationalism, and which he has critiqued? So has he any critique of the popular culture itself? So that's
Sure. We'll take maybe two more questions and then the panel can respond.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I just wanted to ask both the speakers if they could say something about Tagore's ideas on civilization, and especially in this time when we are seeing the rise of Asia and China in particular, but also the war in Iran. Keeping all of those things in mind, how do you see the concept of civilization and its importance today?
So my question is, in current scenario, we see extreme nationalism, and that is because of the situation we have. Other countries are nuclear powered and everything, and as we see that Tagore's nationalism is not only about nationalism; it's about patriotism. So how can we inculcate in our culture and in whole world so that we can live up to that level again?
Thank you for the wonderful discussion. I have two questions. I'll ask them very quickly. One is, Tagore seems to have, in his speeches on nationalism, he seems to have internalized some kind of an Oriental thought. For him, he essentializes the West and the East in some senses. For him, the West is mechanical, scientific, and so on, and the East is spiritual, full of life, and so on. So he has internalized some kind of an Oriental thinking. And this binary holds, it's no longer true. I mean, the East is as capitalist as the West today. So in that sense, how do we make him relevant today? So that's the first question. The second is, Tagore's criticism of Western capitalism, Western nationalism, also sometimes is read as the criticism of Western modernity. And importantly, in post-colonial India, with the coming of movements around identity politics, the Dalit movement, the women's movement, and so on, there's the need for embracing modernity has become very, very important. And there's a tendency to often read discourses of Gandhi and Tagore about modernity as being antagonistic to the discourses about modernity which feminism and the Dalit movement have put forth. So instead of putting them as antagonistic tendencies, is there any meaningful way with which we can bring these two discourses together? So these are the two.
I'll tackle your question. In the travel notes that Gurudev wrote, everywhere there is a wistfulness. When he goes to France and he goes to Germany, Russia, there's a certain wistfulness that why is India not developed? Why is India poor? Why don't we have the facilities for education? So I don't think, I don't know, but I don't think he was anti-Western or he felt that they were materialistic. Asia had no chance when Gurudev was alive. Asia was not, they had no great power except Japan. So as a country developed, as it got a standing army and economic development, naturally the profile of a country changes. But from what I've read of his travelogues, I don't think Tagore was critical of Western countries. He admired their development, their discipline, and their hard work. And everywhere he says, why can't we be like this? Same in Russia, as he went to France, Germany, discipline. So I don't think he was that kind of parochial India that, parochial Indians, which we are now, everything is good about us and the West is bad. If that was so, we wouldn't be slavishly imitating them.
There have been so many questions, I've actually forgotten, I didn't write them down. So I will just ramble a bit. Now, what I essentially wanted to say, a couple of comments generally. One is that both Gandhi and Tagore, and especially Tagore, was not completely and only an international. In both their lives, both in Gandhi's life and in Tagore's life, the decisive thing about what brought them up, they both were born in very elite circumstances, especially Tagore. It was when he could see with his own eyes the condition of the ordinary people. That is when his entire worldview changed. He was put by his father to look up the estates, and he went and visited all his estates in East Bengal. And there he stayed for a year on end, and he observed the poor. So when people ask whether he was sensitive or not to the issues of the time, very much so. In so many ways. Of course, being a writer and a poet, he expressed his criticism throughout his many novels and short stories. If you read them, they all have a message. Many of them, or not all of them, all have a message highlighting the problems of society of its time. So yes, I think that what we must understand is we must not allow the thoughts of these people to become ossified some kind of commandments that are written in stone. I think they are lessons, and I think they are guidance as to how we can be. If today we can't look at our own problems with a fresh eye, we will not be able to solve them. What we have tried to highlight in his thing is what is the method that they showed. What is the method that they showed to deal with the problem? We see where nationalism of a particular kind, where it goes. We don't want to go that way. It's very tempting, isn't it? To immediately take up arms and fight. But is there a better way? Now, Tagore won't tell you in 100 years ago what you should do today. In today's world, you've got to look at the world around and find. But is there morality in your approach? Is there spirituality in your approach? Can you justify it on any particular fundamental grounds rather than pure and simple opportunism? That is the question. I think we are lost in opportunism, short-sightedness, reactive behavior, and have lost the spiritual compass. What I basically wanted to highlight is that the need for resurrecting the spiritual compass in our day-to-day conflicting reality is the best homage we can pay to people like him, because we have to solve our problems today using our own ingenuity. But one thing we do know, that there are some human tendencies which repeat themselves, which are the path of error, reaction, selfishness, etc. This tension of human beings, and this, as I pointed out, selfishness versus competition versus cooperation. Both are important. I don't think we need, everybody will become, there will be no competition. That's not true. There will be. But how do you find that balance? So that's a struggle, the spiritual struggle. I really wanted to say is that if we imagine a liberal society coming, in that liberal society, what kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts, what kind of attitudes do we need to cultivate? And how to do it? In fact, that's where culture comes in. Culture is a much more powerful way of shaping emotions than any kind of lectures and other kinds of things. It's only through this, this appeal to the heart, to the soul, to the music, poetry. I think Tagore's poetry is much more powerful than many of his prose writings.
Just like to say, one of the questions, Rabindranath was, of course, a great, great poet, an international traveler, earned many honors. When the land reform movement in India began, the poem which inspired Jawaharlal Nehru and his cabinet was a very small, very powerful poem called Dui Bigha Jumi, which 2 acres of land, in which landlord grabs the little holding of the small farmer, buys him up, evicts him, and he comes back and to his owned little plot of land. He sits under a mango tree, and a mango drops on his lap, and this Upen is the person in the poem, and he holds that mango, and tears come to his eyes. And then this land-grabbing landlord comes, who has evicted him, and says that you are such a thief, how dare you do it? And there's a line which, according to Jawaharlal Nehru, can ignite rebellions. Tumi Maharaj, Sadhu hole aaj, ami aaj chor bote. And this was the way that, I mean, he could be spiritual, but he also could point out the most painful experiences of the underprivileged in India. And that was something which a person who came from an elitist background, that is what gave him a special insight, which I think many of the leaders did not have. They didn't have that feeling that he had for the poorest. And it was genuine, because it was not just an intellectual expression. Yeah. Tumi Maharaj, that means you, Maharaj. Sadhu hole aaj, you are truly a saint today, and I am the thief. I am truly the thief. So, it was such bitterness, and Jawaharlal Nehru was he said that was his inspiration for land reforms. Poet is always a prophet.
I wanted to ask about Shantiniketan, Tagore's University, and like all. I mean, we've been talking about how Tagore traveled the world, and even at that time and at this time, there is a need to know people, right? There is a need to know about the other civilization and so on. And in that respect, like how do we think about Tagore's Shantiniketan project and that education compared to other universities and so on?
Well,
I just have a question, not exactly on Tagore, but like the thoughts that were discussed today. So my question is basically like this idea of this very mechanical society that we are at, and I feel like in a certain sense these ideas this Tagore had at that point, in our current timelines, in a certain sense they were defeated by the machine. And one of the reasons I feel that they were defeated is because these ideas are more abstract, compared to say the more technological stuff about like land grabbing and all. That's much more easier to do, and this is much more hard and much more like that journey. We do not know how to do this. We understand it ethically, morally, spiritually, but we cannot do it. So my question to you guys is like, do you think society at this particular juncture, where like you guys, and I believe everyone understands, we are at this juncture of the Third World War or something of the sort, like, do you think society can make a hard turn for the better, like this idealistic society where like Tagore had these all 5 pointers and all that stuff? So these are pointers, but like how do you get to enact those pointers at a society level and bring up a society nationhood of that sort? Can that be done? Do you guys see it at that particular?
Yes. About Shantiniketan, it was a unique experience. And at the same time, it had its root in ancient India, where they had this kind of ashram. He called the campus ashram, which was there in universities from Takshashila to Nalanda, residential thing. And it was a world university. Vishwabharati means that. And it became a center of gathering from various scholars and intellectuals all over the world, Indologists, political scientists, people like Giuseppe Tucci, Wintonitz, C.F. Andrews. So many people came, Russians. They came there to study about India, and they contributed. Gurudev saw way back in the early 20th century that when Asia would be freed, India would have to learn how to get along with various people. So the first institute of Chinese studies was in Shantiniketan, China Bhavan, which is now a thriving institute all by itself. So it did become a center of world learning, and he was inspired by what had happened in Takshashila and Nalanda, which was a gathering of scholars from all over the world, Western Asia and others. And I think, of course, it is the stature of Rabindranath Tagore which drew people all over the world like a magnet. And it's unfortunately not what it was. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Asked whether society today can make a hard right for the improvement. See, the basic question here is that we know the history. If you look at the last 100 years, it is the history of dominance of capital. And capitalism did win that battle. But in these situations, there is this contra force, constant. It was not, and I think we reached a point today where once again we'll have an opportunity to see whether we will continue down this path or not, because the world is heading towards a crisis. Whether or not the Iran war stops tomorrow, the whole point is that we know that the American power world has changed. Globalization is gone. A new kind of nationalism is starting. And if we are faced by a crisis, for example, of environmental crisis, and there's a prediction I saw before coming, 2027 will be, the El Nino will be so big that it will be an unthinkable kind of climatic crisis in 2027. So if we can't grow food, see, in other words, a crisis is coming. In this crisis, people will have a chance to rethink as to what we can do. The question is, what can we do today? What we can do today is prepare for the possible future and see whether or not, see, nobody is saying goodbye to markets. Nobody is saying goodbye to capitalism completely. Even Tagore says, have a balance. Can we create a balance? At the moment, there is no balance. There is completely aggressive accumulation. That has to change. And what we must do is to do whatever possible to do it. One thing I wanted to say is that Tagore's vision was actually quite similar to Vivekananda's vision of India's role. And what Vivekananda said was that if a country loses sight of its main mission, each country, according to him, has a mission, historically given. It's your job to follow it through. And according to both Tagore and Vivekananda, the job of Indian civilization is to enable multiple races to survive together in harmony, in mutual support. And Tagore also talked about Eastern, that the East will show the way, etc. So when they talk about East will show the way, what they really mean is whether or not we can live up to this historical mission. Now, I don't know if that historical mission is still alive in our souls today. If not, what is the vision? What should be our mission? So that, I think that's what is necessary.
Thank you to both our speakers for really shedding, from marking one part of the program, which is a very meaningful celebration or marking of the 165th birth anniversary, by reflecting on the idea of nationalism, patriotism, and humanism. But I think what I got from the range of audience responses really is a hunger to try and understand the world that we live in. That's what came across so powerfully. And I guess the point we have to make is Tagore is one starting point for that conversation. Gandhi is the other starting point for the conversation, and third starting point from the question from the young man in the back is of course Dr. Ambedkar, and we have to think of all these thinkers coming together, and maybe even, as you said, Mr. Professor Swami Vivekananda as well, to range of other thinkers to think about what our responses to the contemporary may be. On that point, of course, we hope that BIC will continue to have more such events where we can reflect and try and understand the world that we live in, because I think that's the direction in which the conversation went. So thank you so much to both our speakers, and now we'll enjoy the performance by the. I'd like to invite Joita.
So good evening, chief guests, our esteemed chief guests, and everyone gathered here. My name is Jaita. So I'm really privileged to be a part of this beautiful program and the August Company. Want to thank BIC and my very old and dear friend Dhruvo for inviting me to this occasion. I'll try to render my songs, my chosen songs, to share an experience of the deep, soulful music of Bengal. Please pardon me for my shortcomings. Thank you. Okay. Sa re ga re sa sa pa ma re ga re sa. My first song is Kar Milano Chaho Birohi. It's an emotional piece by Tagore, and like many of his songs, blends romantic longing with the divine. So please enjoy this song, and I'll just go on. Kar milano chao birohi, kar milano chao birohi, tahare kotha খুঁজেছো ভব অরণ্যে কুটিল জটিল গহনে শান্তি সুখহীন ওরে মন কার মিলন চাও বিরহী কার মিলন চাও বিরহী তাহারে কোথা খুঁজেছো ভব অরণ্যে কুটিল জটিল গহনে শান্তি সুখহীন ওরে মন কার মিলন চাও বিরহে। দেখো দেখো রে চিত্ত কমলে, দেখো দেখো রে চিত্ত কমলে, চরণ পদ রাজে হায়, চরণ পদ রাজে হায়। অমৃত জ্যোতি কিবা সুন্দর, ওরে মন কার মিলন চাও বিরহে, কার মিলন চাও বিরহে। তাহারে কোথা খুঁজেছ ভব অরণ্যে, কুটিল জটিল গহনে শান্তি সুখহীন, ওরে মন কার মিলন চাও বিরহে, কার মিলন চাও বিরহে। My next number is a Baul song. It's Barir Kache Arshinogo. It's written by poet Lalon Phokir, and here he talks about the spiritual ignorance. He mentions that truth is like a mirror. It shows you to yourself, and only possible if you want to see that. So Arshi Nagar means a mirror city. Arshi is mirror and Arshi Nagar is mirror city, the place for self-reflection. So I'll try to sing this number, and just pardon me for 2 minutes till I take my instruments. Can I have the other mic, please? This is called the Doogie. So it gives a rhythm or a tempo to my songs. And this is the Iktara. So I have to tune it to my scale. And this is my ghungur, which there's only one piece, and we usually wear it on our right leg. This is the ghungur. Joy Guru. So I begin my song. Lalun Phokir's Ami Ekdino Na Dekhilam Tare. Ami একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে, বাড়ির কাছে আরশিনগর, সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে, সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে। আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে, বাড়ির কাছে আরশিনগর, ও সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে, সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে। আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে। ভ্রমবেরে ওই অগাধ পানি, নাই কিনারা নাই তরুণী পারে। ব্রহ্মেরে ওই অগাধ পানি, নাই কিনারা নাই তরুণী পারে। মনে বাঞ্ছা করি দেখব তারে, মনে বাঞ্ছা করি দেখব তারে। আমি কেমনে সেথা যাই রে, আমি কেমনে সেথা যাই রে। আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে। কি বলবো পর শির কথা, হস্ত পদ স্কন্দ মাথা নাই রে। কি বলবো পর শির কথা, হস্ত পদ স্কন্দ মাথা নাই রে। ক্ষণিক থাকে শূন্যের উপর, সে ক্ষণিক থাকে শূন্যের উপর, ও সে ক্ষণিক ভাসে নীরে, ও সে ক্ষণিক ভাসে নীরে। আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে। পড়শি যদি আমায় ছুতো, জমজাত না সকল যেত দূরে। পড়শি যদি আমায় ছুতো, জমজাত না সকল যেত দূরে। সে আর লালন একসাথে রয়, সে আর লালন একসাথে রয়। তবু লক্ষ যোজন ফাঁকরে, তবু লক্ষ যোজন ফাঁকরে। আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে। বাড়ির কাছে আর শ্রীনগর, ও সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে সেথায় এক পড়শি বসত করে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে জয় গুরু। Thank you. Do we have time or we close it? How? One more? Thank you. So the next number is Lalon Shai's Khachar Bhitor Ochin Pakhi. Here, the khacha means the cage where your soul is entrapped, and the body temporarily. And by true wisdom, the poet says that it's under self-realization. His Baul spirituality even influenced Tagore in many of his works. So please enjoy the song Khachar Bhitor Ochin Pakhi. Jai Guru. তারে ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি তারে ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি দিতাম পাখির পাই কেমনে আসি যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসি যায় তারে ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি তারে ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি দিতাম পাখির পায় কেমনে আসি যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসি যায় আট কুঠুরি নয় দরজাটা মধ্যে মধ্যে ঝড়কা কাঁটা আট কুঠুরি নয় দরজাটা মধ্যে মধ্যে ঝড়কা কাঁটা তার উপরে সদর কোঠা তার উপরে সদর কোঠা আয়না মহল তাই কেমনে আসি যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় কপালের ফের নইলে কি পাখিটির এমন ব্যবহার কপালের ফের নইলে কি পাখিটির এমন ব্যবহার খাঁচা ছেড়ে পাখি আমার খাঁচা ছেড়ে পাখি আমার কোন বনে পালাই কেমনে আসে যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় মন তুই রইলি খাঁচার আশে এ খাঁচা যে তোর কাঁচা বাসে মন তুই রইলি খাঁচার আশে খাঁচা যে তোর কাঁচা বাসে কোন দিন খাঁচা পড়বে খসে কোন দিন খাঁচা পড়বে খসে লালন কেটে কয় কেমনে আসে যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় তারে ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি দিতাম পাখির পায় কেমনে আসে যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় জয় গুরু জয় গুরু থ্যাংক ইউ
All great things come to an end, and for someone who's been tasked with kind of what you call curating the show, it's my honor's duty to kind of propose a vote of thanks, and that's not a very easy job because one has to be very inclusive, and when there's an event on Tagore, it becomes even more challenging. The genesis of this whole idea was in a meeting in Professor Arvind's office when we thought we would showcase Bengal, the two Bengals beyond the mainstream media reportage. And I don't know whether we have been able to do so or not. We tried at least. I thank the panelists. I thank Madam Achala Maulik, Professor Chiranjeev Sen for taking time out. They had a busy schedule. They had their own personal constraints. And I think that's a testimony to their commitment to Tagore. When I proposed this idea to Madam Achala Maulik, she said, for Gurudev, anytime. And my link to, or rather my introduction to Madam Maulik was through my friend from NCBS, Achasman Raju, who is a part of the audience. I thank Raju for that. Okay. Professor Chiranjeev Sen, I got introduced through Professor Supriya Roy Chaudhary. I don't know whether she's there or not in the audience. But I thank both of them immensely for it. Professor Arvind Narayan, who has been not only whom you have seen as the moderating the whole show, has been an inspiration for me in many ways. Perhaps my only takeaway from my course at National Law School was getting to know Professor Arvind Narayan, okay? And I thank him immensely for it. I thank BIC. Nazneen has been a great support. Her own colleague Sandhya too, and BIC in particular has been a great support, okay? A very key performer for today whom you heard and who showcased the two Bengals was my friend Jaita Chakravarti. She stepped in and she had a personal, early part of the week, she had to do her rounds of the hospital wearing the hat of a dutiful wife. But despite that, she did it. I am immensely grateful to you, Jaita, for that. Okay. Last but not the least, we tried to showcase the relevance of Tagore in today's world, and we count on you, audience, to take it forward. And we thank you for coming in large numbers on a working day, braving the traffic of Bangalore. Okay? Thank you very much. Have a great, whatever evening is left of you. And there are some books of Tagore on the way. You can have a look at it. Okay? We would really thank you very much and have a great evening. Thank you.